Yes, hello again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and thanks for joining us again for the 2025 Bill Brown Classic Scramble. Yes, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and as you can see, we're out and about on our travels once again, and today we've made the journey from Scotland to Milnthorpe in Cumbria to cover this 2025 Bill Brown Classic Scramble event. Now this event is of course run by the Westmoreland Motor Club, who have been putting on trials and scrambles and other off-road events in and around this area for over 100 years. So in fact, I think they celebrated their centenary back in 2010, so that's 115 years of experience that these guys have got in putting on these off-road events. So we're in very good hands with the Westmoreland Club for this weekend. Now, this event used to be called in the past the Kendal Classic Revival Scramble, but of course it has been renamed this year to honour our guest of honour for this weekend, who is none other than Mr. Wilsport himself, Bill Brown, the man who supplies you all those lovely helmets and gloves and boots for your off-road racing. So Bill will be our guest of honour this weekend, and I think he's just recently celebrated another birthday, but I don't know exactly what birthday that will be, but all the very best to you, Bill, and I hope you had a fantastic day. So we're looking forward to seeing Bill in and around the paddock this weekend. Now, with regards to the racing classes, as yet I haven't been issued with a programme, but we will have a full weekend of racing for bikes from the old vintage pre-68s right up to the twin shock classes. So there's quite a lot going on here at Westmoreland this weekend. So as usual, before we get down to looking at any of the racing footage, we're going to have our usual walk around the paddock. So let's go around and take a quick look at some of these nice bikes that are soon to take part in this 2025 Bill Brown Classic Scramble. Okay, so this is basically the start of our coverage from the 2025 Bill Brown two-day Classic Scramble, and as I mentioned, we're going to have a quick wander around the paddock looking at some of the machines from the Saturday's race programme, and then we'll do a similar video for the Sunday's bikes in part 2. And of course, after we've posted all of the bikes from the paddock from both days, we'll then get down to editing all of the racing footage, and initially it looks like there'll be at least 5-hour-long episodes to cover both days racing. So quite a lot of stuff to get through. So let's go ahead and look at our first batch of motorcycles from the Saturday's paddock. And our first feature bike is this very nice 1973 CZ that belongs to John Sinnott. Now, I do remember that John told me on the day that his bike isn't an original machine, so there's certainly no need to leave any comments about it not having the correct parts bolted onto it, but it's still a very nice example of one of these Czechoslovakian racers, and that's John on the left hand side there, talking bikes and other stuff to another racing legend, Jem Parker, on the right. Now, I'm not exactly sure as just to how many bikes were actually at this event over the course of the 2 days, but it must have been at least a couple of hundred, and as much as I'd like to have filmed every single one of them, these examples here are just a few of the lucky ones that I could gain access to. Anyhow, John's 1973 250 CZ is certainly based around the 1973 chassis and engine, and John's changed quite a few parts on this machine, and it's not because there was actually something wrong with the originals or that they simply didn't work. Most of the changes that have been made were to make the bike a bit more user-friendly on the track and to suit John's own personal requirements. So the engine is indeed a 73 250, and one of the first changes that you can see is that John's swapped the old original Jekov carburetor for a much more modern Mikuni, which is a pretty common swap on these CZs, because the old Jekovs did have a bit of a reputation for leaking and flooding, so these Mikunis are a much better alternative. But another upgrade, and again a popular swap, is to do away with the long gear shifter and fit one of these Peter Gerrard linkage style replacement selectors, which when fitted certainly does away with the long throw that you normally experience between the gears when shifting these engines. And after you fit this Peter Gerrard linkage system, it does make your old Czechoslovakian two-stroke as slick and as short as any equivalent Japanese off-roader. Again, up here at the front of John's Racer, it's the original Czechoslovakian-made CZ forks, which, as I remember, for that year they were quite decent units, and they did work quite well on this twin shock race bike. And the alloy wheels are again the self-same Acron rims on both the front and at the back of our CZ. Now, I do remember John telling me on the day that they did spend quite a lot of time prepping and painting these CZ hubs, and in the correct CZ colour, I might add. So although there are quite a few non-original components on John's machine, he did take quite a lot of time to get the colour code of the hubs absolutely spot on. Moving on to the back, the old factory fitted shocks are of course now long gone on this bike, thankfully, because for that particular decade off-road suspension wasn't exactly high tech. So after 52 years they've now been replaced by a much better and more modern pair of Falcon Classic shocks, which are way more better than those 70s originals. And so you've probably already noticed that this plastic fuel tank's not what would have been fitted to this 73 chassis, because I'm pretty sure it would have been an alloy tank for this particular model, although John did tell me that this part was from a much later model, so I expect that it was more of a personal choice for John rather than the actual availability of the original tank to fit onto this bike. So again, this lovely seat on John's twin shocker, I do remember him telling me that this came from the Czech Republic, because quite surprisingly enough, you can still buy new old stock parts for these CZs over there, and if you're not short of a bit of cash, then they'll even build you a period correct replica of some of the CZ models that raced in those 1970s. Anyhow, this is another bike that we might put on the back burner and do a more in-depth feature on it here on my channel at a later date, and you'll be able to see John when he takes to the track when he's racing this bike in the pre-1974 up to 250cc class. That's of course when we eventually get around to posting all of the racing from the Saturday's race programme. Now next up, this is a bike that we'll definitely be featuring later in the year, and this awesome looking red rocket is Jem Parker's 1979 CR250 Honda, which again is an example that's not original from 1979, but it's still a belter of a bike just the same. And Jem was also quick to point out that his bike's about as far away as you can get from a stock original red rocket, although it does have the stock 79 frame, engine, seat and fuel tank, which was really the basis Jem needed to bolt on all of his other goodies that are fitted to this machine, which, as in our previous John Sinnott machine, are all done to really improve the handling and the overall performance of the bike on the racetrack. But as we make our way on to the power plant of this CR250, and I don't know if there's been much in the way of any upgrades to this Honda 250 two-stroke engine, and if I know Jem, I'll bet that it'll have one or two exotic parts bolted onto the inside and maybe even the outside of the engine as well. But you can see that it's got a flat slide Mikuni carburetor to replace the original 79 one, and the bottom half of the motor is painted black as well, which of course were the colour of the 79 red rocket engines when they were sold in Japan in that year, although our European red rockets were coloured in that fire engine red. And a couple of the other upgrades on this engine, you can see we've got a quite high quality replacement expansion chamber and tailpipe that's been added to our CR engine, and this is a superbly engineered Fresco part, which once again is a common replacement for the 79 Honda original, which is a simple bolt-on substitute to the stock pipe. And that Fresco expansion chambers complemented by yet another Fresco alloy tailpipe here at the back, so you can just imagine that there's quite a decent bark from this silencer when our 250 gets fired into life. And so the suspension that we've got on the front of Jem's Honda is once again completely different from the 79 originals, and these Showa forks are from a much later model of Honda motocrosser, and as I remember, I'm pretty sure Jem told me that these were 43mm units, and both the front and the rear hubs are Honda parts, and these have been mated to quite a good quality pair of SM Pro Platinum Gold anodized alloy wheels. And as we make our way onto the rear suspension department, we've got a pair of YSS piggyback suspension units, although Jem, in his wisdom, decided to stick some white power graphics onto the gas and oil reservoirs, but he definitely did say that these were YSS piggyback suspension units, which, as you can see, are also mounted onto this quite substantial alloy swing arm, which I'm told was manufactured by JK Racing. But you can see that it's quite a substantial piece of kit and well different from the simple box section steel swing arm that was fitted to these models back in 1979, but you can certainly see that it's heavy duty and very well engineered. So as I said, this is just a very brief look at Jem's CR250, and As I mentioned, we've already got this bike penciled in to our schedules to do a full feature on later in the year. So if you're into your twin shock two-strokers and these red rockets in particular, then this is going to be another nice bike to watch out for on my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel as we head towards the end of 2025. Right, so staying with the Honda theme for the time being, and this was another little firecracker that I spotted on my walkabout on Saturday, and this is John Kemp's lovely little Honda CR125 from 1980. And John's 125 was just one of many of these smaller engine bikes that were taking part in this Bill Brown Scramble weekend. Now, during my brief conversation with John, he did tell me that he'd recently performed a full restoration on this bike through the winter closed racing season, and it certainly shows because he's done a cracking job on this bike's refurbishment, and it looks every bit as good as it was when it left Japan all those years ago. And these smaller Honda CRs are certainly one of the more popular choices for riders who want to get into the very popular twin shock 125 air-cooled Cup racing series. Anyhow, more or less every single part on John's little Honda's had some kind of refurb or work done on it during that recent restoration, and parts like the bike's frame and swing arm and many of the other chassis components were all blasted, prepped and then repainted to make them look like brand new once again. And so you can see by looking at the finished article here that John's certainly put the hours in, and he's made a fantastic job of bringing this bike back to life. Now, I suppose you already know that these little CR125 engines were quite powerful for such a compact two-stroke, and this 1980 engine, as I recall, had a centre port exhaust motor with the exhaust port going in between those two down tubes of the frame, rather than the earlier 1979 engine that had the exhaust outlet that exited on the right hand side of the single down tube chassis that was on that 79 bike. But it did have a 6-speed gearbox, so there were certainly plenty cogs inside this engine to keep your left foot dancing up and down to help keep that little CR singing along. And as in our previous Gem Parker CR250, John's bike has a replacement exhaust expansion chamber, which I have to say is a bit of a work of art in its own right, and I'm not actually sure as to who made it, but it's certainly a superb piece of manufacturing, which looks like it could be made of stainless steel. And so up here at the front end, we've got a good pair of those proper Honda front forks, which to me look like they could be a lot beefier than the original 80s suspension units that were fitted to these 125. So maybe John's opted to fit 250 forks onto his little 125 to make that front end just that little bit stronger. But other parts like the wheels on John's machine are a pair of nice gold anodized alloy replacements, because I think these 80 CR125s would have had just basic polished alloy rims in that year. And as we stay here at the back end of the bike and to sort out the rear of his 125, John's decided to go full on and fit a pair of top of the range Swedish Öhlins shocks onto his CR, and these quite expensive Öhlins will without doubt be a massive improvement over the Honda Showa original. So with regards the front and the rear suspension on John's machine, he appears to have that particular part of his race bike all sorted out. And as we move up into the pilot seat, we can see some nice upgrades to the original specs on this bike, with some good quality Pro taper levers there, some Pro grip handlebar grips, and of course a decent pair of Renthal handlebars as well. And that handlebar mount and risers are once again upgrades from the bike's 1980 original parts. So there you go, another cracking looking little Honda, and certainly a bike that you can see in action on the track in the forthcoming racing videos, where you can see John race this little beauty in the twin shock 125B racing class. And again, this is yet another bike that we'll keep in the archives to maybe do a full feature on sometime later in the year. So there you go, that's John Kemp's 1980 CR 125. Now, as I continued my walk around the paddock, this was another nice old timer that I spotted on the Saturday, and this vintage classic here is John Britton's 1959 Norbsa 500, another one of the many British classics that were racing at the Bill Brown Scramble this year. Now, anyhow, as the title suggests, this Norbsa is of course a combination of a BSA B31 chassis and a fantastic single-cylinder long-stroking four-banger Norton engine. And it's a bike that maybe on the face of it looks like it could be something from about 100 years ago, but I must say there's certainly something about these old British motorcycles that people can still relate to. And I think it comes from a way back in the 1950s and 60s when bikes such as this Norbsa and other bikes like Matchlesses and BSA Gold Stars and of course the British Triumph Twins were the mainstay of those British scramble stars of that time, when you'd be able to see them racing up to their armpits in deep mud when the BBC used to broadcast live scrambles events as part of their grandstand winter scramble series, when many of the stars of their day could be seen riding these big single-cylinder four-strokes that were very similar to our Norbsa that is featured here. And so from what I remember from the day of filming John's bike, that this engine is an S2 power plant, obviously Norton of course, and it's a pre-unit engine because the gearbox is separated from the engine but connected by way of a simple drive chain, and that gearbox again is a 4-speed Norton AMC unit, which I do remember John saying that he only normally uses 3 of the 4 cogs inside this box. But for its time, these Norton AMC boxes were fitted to a multitude of different machines in that period, and by all accounts these gearboxes were quite rugged and generally reliable. And moving on to the clutch transmission side, I'm quite sure that I heard John telling me on the day that it was a dry clutch that was inside this alloy casing. Now, the front suspension on our Norbsa are a pair of Norton forks, and those top and bottom alloy triple clamps are certainly different from the ones that would have been fitted to the BSA chassis way back in the 1950s. And as we pan down the suspension, you can see it's quite a small old school drum brake for such a big heavy lump of a bike, and I know that particular point explicitly because the bike did fall over when we were filming it, and believe me, this is one monster of a machine dead weight, so John must have had muscles like big Arnie Schwarzenegger to lift this bike back onto its wheels. And again, because this old BSA chassis doesn't have the engine oil stored in the frame like some of the other vintage classics of that same period, it has to have a separate oil tank to store the motor's lubricant, which you can see here is bolted onto the right hand side of the frame. And you can see that John's old bike's certainly been through the Scrambles wars, because it's still got plenty of its battle scars and dents on this alloy fuel tank as evidence of previous encounters on the track. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's still great to be able to see these older bikes still being raced at these old school vintage scramble events, because scrambling in the UK basically all started with these kind of machines back in the 1950s and 1960s, and this lovely Norbser of John's was just one of two old classics that he had on display at this Bill Brown event. And this bike here was John's other nice classic, and this time it's his 650cc Triumph twin Tribsa, which once again is using a BSA frame with that popular Triumph 650cc twin inside this chassis. So it's another similar machine to our Norbser with a lot of steel alloy and of course a British made engine to power it. And so once more we've got a pre-unit type setup here with the transmission separate from the engine, which tells you that this is again an early model of Triumph twin power plant, because some of the later Triumph engines had the gearbox inside the motor's casing, making it a conventional unit construction, just like many other motorcycles of its day. And as we make our way onto the clutch side of our Triumph twin, you can see that the footrest on this left-hand side of the bike has been bolted onto the outside of the casing and not onto the chassis in the conventional manner. And this was certainly a design that the once great British-built CCM bikes used back in the 1970s, when they used to fix the footrests onto the outside of those big BSA B50 engines that powered them. Now, with regards to the front forks that are fitted to John's Tribsa, these look like another pair of Norton suspension units, which, as I mentioned, were used to quite good effect on many different makes of British off-roaders of that period. And here at the back end of our Tribsa, the old damper units from the 1950s are now long gone on this old timer, and they've been replaced by a much more modern pair of classic replica suspension units. Now, of course, back in the 1950s, it was aluminium that was the chosen material to make things like side panels and fuel tanks and mudguards for these British classics, and this alloy fuel cell here usually held enough gas to keep that Triumph twin happy on even the longest of Scramble's races. Anyhow, there you go, another nice old classic there from John Britton, who I remember telling me that this was his backup bike to his Norbser that he uses more frequently. And if you're interested, John's Norbser 500 and his Tribsa 650 are two of the bikes that you can see taking part in the pre-1960s championship, when we eventually get around to doing the racing footage. And so as we move on from the old school big four-stroke classics to the relatively modern lightweight two-strokes of the 1970s, and this is Ian Knight's 1974 Honda CR250 Elsinore, which is another one of the super quick race bikes you can take a look at on the track quite soon. But as you're probably already aware, these Elsies were the bike that basically brought motocross into the modern age, because this was Honda's first ever fully purpose-built race bike, exclusively made for motocross racing, because some of the off-road bikes that Honda produced prior to these Elsinore's arrival were really just converted road bikes that had knobbly tyres fitted to them. But for a brand new design and the first of its kind, Honda certainly got their calculations absolutely spot on first time out, because this was an exceptional bike for its time. And when they first came out, which I think was about 1973, it seemed that the world just couldn't get hold of one of these Elsies fast enough, and Honda were selling them before they'd even built them. Such was the demand at the time. And although our Ian Knight bike here is a 250, they also made a 125 version as well. So you can see that Ian's bike isn't a fully stock example from 1974, although to be fair, it does have many of its original parts, like the frame and the engine, the fuel tank, the forks and side panels and seat. And of course, many of its upgraded parts are really just fitted to make the bike a bit more user-friendly when Ian's riding it on the track. But nowadays it's quite common to put upgraded parts on these little Elsies, because you're never going to find a 1974 original. So for a 51-year-old bike, this one of Ian's still looks the business. And more or less the same endorsement goes for this superb Elsinore 250 two-stroke engine, which again was super impressive for a brand new design of motorcycle engine, which, as I recall, I think had magnesium outer casings to try and help reduce its overall weight. But this Elsie's power plant certainly had a good 5-speed gearbox, and I think it was just a traditional wet oil-cooled multi-plate clutch as well. But as I just mentioned, when developing a brand new engine to power any off-roader, it usually takes quite some time for a manufacturer to get things absolutely right, although Honda did hit the sweet spot with this two-stroke engine at the very first time of asking. And so up here at the front end of Ian's Elsie, we've got a nice pair of billet alloy top and bottom triple clamps to replace what would have been the Honda originals. And with regards to the bike's front forks, I'm not entirely sure if these are the stock standard 74 items, because it is a very popular swap on these Elsinores to fit stronger and beefier suspension systems to cope with our modern day racetracks. But that front mother there still has a CR mud flap extension still in place. Although there is one part on this bike that's definitely not stock, and it's this gorgeous looking exhaust expansion chamber, which when you look at it, it's like a big snake as it wraps its way around and underneath that 250 engine. But it'd certainly be a pity to get such a nice looking pipe damaged, because you can see that there's not an awful lot of ground clearance between the pipe and the track, although it certainly has the look, that's for sure. Now, that well-engineered race expansion chamber is of course mated to this lightweight alloy tailpipe here at the back of the bike, which again is not a standard fitment from 1974. And once more you can see that Ian's bike also has a replacement lightweight alloy swing arm instead of that tubular steel part that Honda fitted to this bike in 1974. But as I said, this swap again is quite common practice with Elsinore owners. Anyhow, this is yet another bike to look out for come race day, because this is a seriously quick motorcycle, and Ian will be racing this in the championship over 60s class. And so as I continued my walk around the Bill Brown Classic Scramble paddock, I came across Mark Sheldon's nice 1980 RM 125 Suzuki, which was another cracking example of one of these popular 80s 125s that, as you know, was the very last year of Suzuki's twin shockers, because in 1981 they then switched to a monoshock back end on this bike, and they also changed the motor from air-cooled to liquid-cooled. So it's quite good to see one of these older RM twin shockers once again. However, when it came to this 1980 Suzuki RM125 engine, as far as I remember, this motor had undergone quite a lot of design improvements over its 1979 predecessor, and as I remember, I think some of the improvements included a heavier crankshaft and things like new ignition mapping, and I'm also sure that the stock expansion chamber exhaust was made bigger in a bid to give the engine a much wider and more useful power band. Now, inside this 1980 RM125 engine, it was a 6-speed gearbox, much like all of its 125 competition of its day. So it was basically a case of keeping this little rever on the pipe and get your feet dancing up and down on those cogs to keep our RM buzzing along. But for such a small, compact little air-cooled two-stroker, these 1980 RMs could certainly pack a punch, albeit a small one, and with the right rider in the saddle, you could quite easily make it to the top step of the podium. And here at the back of our RM, as you can see, it's an alloy box section swing arm that's fitted to these in 1918. I've certainly no reason to suspect that this is not the proper swing arm for Mark's bike, because it does look like the correct item for its year of manufacture. But once more, we have old school drum brakes here on the back and also at the front as well. And the suspension this time is a good quality pair of YSS piggyback shocks, which are very popular among many of the riders that race these older twin shock race bikes. But of course, not every single component on Mark's RM is still the same factory fitted 1980 original, and I suppose you can't expect it to be on a 45-year-old dirt bike, especially if it's being raced every single weekend. But Mark certainly appears to have kept the essence of the bike looking like its 1980 brochure picture, and he doesn't seem to have changed too much, other than maybe the rear suspension and maybe a few other smaller parts. But again, like many of the other 125s that were taking part in this race weekend, the quality of some of these machines and the way that they were prepped and readied for racing was just exceptional. And Mark's 1980 RM here was another belter of a bike. And as far as I know, Mark will be racing this particular RM in the support twin shock 125s this weekend. Right, so just to finish off this part one of our Bill Brown Scramble Paddock walkabout. We're going to take a quick look at Kevin Allen's big KTM 4-stroke 600 thumper, an absolute colossus of a bike, and very quick to boot. Anyhow, I've already had the privilege of seeing this bike in action on the track and witnessing Kevin riding this bike. He gave me the impression that he was kind of just sitting in a big armchair, such was the handling and the power delivery of that massive 4-stroke Rotax engine. No dramas or back end kicking out when putting the power down. This bike looked like it was well sorted, and Kevin certainly looked like he was enjoying his time on the track. And so if you're a big fan of these 4-stroke thumpers and these Rotax engines in particular, then I'm pretty sure you don't need me to tell you just how good these Rotax power plants are, because they're a well-proven engine, with this one here being one of the later 4-valve ones that have that toothed drive belt on this left-hand side that connects the valve train on the top of the head to the crankshaft at the bottom. But the torque and the grunt that's delivered from these engines is simply awesome, and it looks like Kevin's had this one converted to electric start, which will certainly save him a lot of kicking to get it fired up. So when it comes to this engine's transmission, this gearbox and the rest of this motor was super tough, and you'd have to be pretty cack-handed to break one of these 4-stroke anvils, because they were certainly that tough, and it was usually just drive belts that occasionally broke, and usually it was just a case of re-timing the engine and then fitting a new belt back on to get it up and running once again. And moving on to the back of Kevin's KTM, it's a pair of quite good quality Falcon piggyback shocks, which I can certainly vouch for with regards to their performance and quality, because I did have a similar pair of these on my old Myco that I raced about 100 years ago, and I always found these Falcons to work very well, and generally they were reliable as well in terms of their component parts. But moving on to the front end of Kevin's thumper, it's a heavy duty pair of Italian Marzoccis that have got the job of keeping that big thumper running straight and true. Now, as to what diameter or what year of bike these are actually from, I don't know, but you can see that they're quite substantial and absolutely perfectly suited for a heavier motocross racer such as this big KTM. And to try and keep that weight down to a decent level, it's a simple box section alloy swing arm that's on our KTM 600, which looks at the bollocks sitting next to those lovely gold anodized alloy wheels. And also at the business end here at the back, this Arrow megaphone tailpipe has the job of making sure that everybody in the vicinity of Kevin's 600 thumper knows exactly when it's blasting around the track. And so there you go, a quite nice bike there to finish off our part one from the Bill Brown Classic Scramble. And it looks like we're going to have to do another 2 videos to complete all of the bikes that we came across on both the Saturday and the Sunday's paddock. So we've still got quite a lot of bikes to get through before we post all the racing from this event. So there you have it, that's our first batch of motorcycles from the Bill Brown Classic Scramble Paddock. That was some of the bikes that are soon to take part in Saturday's race programme. But of course we will be back for a second look around the paddock to take a look at some of the bikes that will be on the Sunday's race programme. But don't forget, you can see all of those bikes and many more like them when we eventually get around to posting all of the racing footage from this two-day event here at Milnthorpe. So for the time being, we'll speak again very soon when we return for the Sunday's paddock walkabout. But for the time being, from me here at Milnthorpe in Cumbria, it's goodbye for now.